All right, we're back here on the Faculty Lounge on 89.5 WJMU The Quad. Once again, I want to thank Dr. Dan Monroe and Provost Aper. It's just fascinating to listen to these guys talk. It's always nice to know that there are really, really smart people here at Millikan, and they're smart.
There are very smart people at Millikan. No doubt about that.
So you've had kind of a rough day.
Yes, I guess, yes.
Tell us a little bit about the story that.
Yeah, the story we've been following from South Carolina. Unfortunately, there was a 6-year-old little girl that had gone missing, got off the school bus on Monday, and disappeared. Just disappeared. And this happened to be a grandchild of one of the members of the Saluki community. And unfortunately, that little girl was found deceased this morning, or earlier today anyway.
And the police are looking at that as murder.
Yeah, so Faye Swetlik, 6 years old, first grader, found deceased this morning. There was a second individual who was just described as a man that was found deceased as well. Not sure what the link is between the two, but it is being looked at as a homicide.
Boy, isn't that a fun story to talk with?
It's horrible. It's horrible. And of course, everybody in the Saluki purebred dog community is thinking about Ruth Collins and her family, and our hearts go out to them. And those of us that pray are praying for the family, and those that don't pray are definitely sending all of their positive thoughts to them, and what is an absolutely horrible situation that no one should ever have to go through. There's nothing in life that prepares you for this, ever. So it's very difficult.
It is.
For a lot of people right now. The other thing is when you have a first grader involved, of course the school is dealing with grief as well, and there are a lot of parents that are wondering what to tell their kids about this type of thing. And I can share just a few thoughts from a family practice standpoint and so forth. If you have a child that has heard about this or that knew Faye, it's really important to tell your child that in as, I guess, minimalistic terms as possible, that Faye was found deceased and so forth, and not dwell on gory details and things like that, but to reassure kids that this isn't going to happen to them. And I think sometimes we get caught up in honesty in our culture and so forth, but children need to know that they're going to be safe and that it's not going to happen to them, even if you can't absolutely guarantee that. It's important to tell them that you are safe. This happened to Faye, but you are safe. It's also an opportunity, an unfortunate and heartbreaking opportunity, to review your kind of stranger danger talk, and again, not scare your children so much as, okay, if you're worrying about these things, make sure that you're not talking with people that you don't know, and that type of thing, and make sure that we always know where you're at, and so forth and so on. So it's a tough story. It is heartbreaking. I was actually on a watch party with Faye's grandmother. They had called a press conference, and a big group of us, in the Saluki dog community, were on in this chat room, kind of supporting Ruth, and the press conference got delayed and got delayed and got delayed, and then they made this announcement, and it was pretty horrible. And the grandmother had been called shortly before that to go to the police station. So we thought perhaps this
Right.
was not good news, that this had taken a really ominous turn.
I was in the room with you as this was happening, and I can, we had that talk as soon as, you were like, why is it being delayed? Well, they may be looking for this or they may be looking for that. Has the grandma been called? No. And then when the grandma was called, you knew.
You knew
it was
something
bad.
really, really horrific had happened,
Yeah.
and so it is tough. These are tough times.
I want to go, and I'm going to change the topic a little bit, but not a whole lot. I read a piece in the Washington Post just the other day, and it was about how children, young students, find the shooter drills that they have in the schools. They find them to be terrifying, and are having problems. A lot of them are having mental and physical problems because of the active shooter drills that they're hosting in schools. And it comes back to what you had said earlier about safety. You want to tell your child they're safe. But how do you tell your child they're safe when the school is telling you this is what you have to do when a shooter comes?
So you kind of approach it with your children, your very young children, the same way you do with fire drills and tornado drills. We don't expect that this ever will happen. On the off chance it does, we want you to know what to do, when this alarm goes off or when you're told to take your preparedness actions. So I think you, unfortunately, kind of deal with it in the same way that you do tornado drills and fire drills. And not to try to really dilute this or anything, but the important thing that the children need to know is, if situation A, B, or C happens, this is what you need to do. This is the plan. And not to dwell on what it's going to be like if the building's burning down, or what it's going to be like inside the building if you're hit by a tornado, and whether or not the walls are safe. And then certainly not to dwell on how horrible it's going to be if there's an active shooter. It's got to be much more of a structured, we don't think that this will ever happen, but if it does, if you hear this alarm, this is where you need to go. Not to dwell so much on there's a shooter in the building and this is what's going to happen, but if you hear this type of alarm, this is the action that you take.
Okay.
And that's much more of the, it's much more procedurally based.
Jason, did you have to go through active shooter drills?
So no, we didn't have active shooter drills, but we did have code yellow and code red. A code yellow drill meant that someone was in the area that was suspicious in our district. Code red meant they were on our school's grounds, and those were the drills we did. We never called them active shooter drills, but I guess it was the same type of thing. Stranger danger, someone's coming towards the school. I don't want to say that I disagree with what Jamie's saying about that'll never happen. This shouldn't happen, but if it does. Now, for young kids, that's a great idea. But middle school and high school,
Oh, yes.
we did those drills. Not a single person took it seriously. And maybe to talk about something a little less scary than shooters, tornado drills. We live in Illinois. Tornado weather,
Yeah.
all the time. Never once had we had to deal with an active situation with it, though. Whenever there was a tornado drill, it was 30 minutes out of class for kids to hang out and talk. And I feel awful saying it, but sometimes I saw it that way too. And
Honestly, that's okay, as long as you are aware of, if this happens, this is the general plan,
Right.
So I mean, not that I think it's okay that nobody, that people are making a joke out of it and so forth, but the point is that you know what to do,
Exactly.
And the other thing is, and little kids see this. They've seen the Parkland shooting.
Yeah.
All right? They've seen or heard about Sandy Hook, depending on how old you are. They've seen these. These kids know, even little kids know, that people want to go into their schools and shoot them. And that has got to be a scary, scary thing.
It's a very scary thing for this particular age group. Faye was 6 years old in first grade. And these are kind of, this is an age group in which imagination is very robust, and that it can be very terrifying, for them. So again, it's not that you don't tell your kids that Faye is dead or, anything like that. But you have to take care in 6-year-old children to reassure them that you are going to be okay. That I'm going to make sure that you are going to be okay and you are safe. And I will do everything I can to protect you. And no, you can't ensure always that that's going to be true. But these kids need to know that because they get very, very terrified, and it actually can be psychologically problematic long term if they don't have that type of reassurance. Particularly if you're a first grader and your friend has just been murdered. So again, it's very important that those parents reassure their children that they are safe. This happened to Faye, but you are safe. And again, it's a really tough situation. The other thing that I was thinking today, because this is so troubling, was Mr. Rogers always pops into my mind. Look for the helpers, and there were thousands of people who shared this little girl's story and who were praying for her and were trying to get the word out. There were people locally that showed up to look for this little girl who had, never met her before, but they dropped everything and went and looked for her. So it's very easy in these situations to lose all faith in humanity, because who could possibly harm a child? At the same time, if you change your focus and you look for the helpers, there were an awful lot of helpers in this situation. So.
And we're going to change the subject after this, but I just have to say, I was getting ready to leave for class, and you were upset. I mean, this upset you this afternoon. And I was changing my show, West Wing, which I'm watching all the time, 24/7 now, because it's the only way that I can live in our political climate. But I was changing that, and I asked you if you wanted to look at or watch Downton Abbey, which is your favorite TV show. And as I was doing that, there was right next to it the Mr. Rogers documentary.
Yeah.
And I really thought before leaving that maybe I should just put Mr. Rogers on, because that would put you in a better place, because it's hard. It is hard.
It's very hard. It's very hard.
So
it is very hard.
Now I want to change the subject. I know that, it's hard to go from this. I did this to my students today. I walked into class, I told them about what was happening, and I told them about, what was happening with you and this little girl and everything that happened. And my class, they had this, oh my goodness, look on their face. And then immediately after that, I changed the subject to what's happening and, what they've got to do and everything else. And I had that smile on my face, and it was that way that you see so often a news anchor who will, 15 people dead from this. And now in sports, the way that you have to change sometimes what's going in something like this to something else. I want to go from that to, well, what's happening right now? What are we needing to be worrying about medically?
So in Illinois, we are in the midst of a flu outbreak. or flu. You know, flu is widespread in Illinois. Flu levels nationwide remain high. We were seeing an awful lot of influenza B earlier in the season. Influenza A is surpassed flu B nationwide in the past couple of weeks, and I have started seeing an uptick in flu A cases as well. What does that mean for you? Not much. You know, symptoms are the same. It's dangerous either way. Treatment is the same. It's just from a nerd standpoint, it's interesting to know which one it is.
Either way, you're going to feel crappy.
Either way, it is miserable. It is miserable.
What's the difference between A and B?
The difference between A and B is just strain. Historically speaking, some of the most dangerous influenza outbreaks in history have been influenza A. However, locally we had a, not locally, influenza B kills people too. There are currently, per the CDC, 2 million influenza cases so far this year estimated, and 12,000 deaths. There have been 78 pediatric deaths so far this year, and unfortunately, earlier this week, there was a local teenager, Joey Sandhaus, who died on Monday. Attended the high school in Chatham, Illinois, and was a junior. I don't know if he had flu A or flu B, but this really hits home. And you know, the flu is just, it's a tough one too,
Yeah.
you know, and it is serious. This is why we need to be getting our immunizations every year. Does not necessarily keep you from catching the flu, but hopefully it prevents you from dying of the flu or being hospitalized from the flu. It really decreases severity. Right now we need to be staying home if we're sick. We need to be washing our hands constantly. Avoid touching your face, and so forth. So that's what we're seeing a lot of locally. Also, strep throat, of course, and there's a pretty nasty cold virus this year as well. But right now, the big story locally is influenza.
And the big story nationally and internationally is still the coronavirus.
Right, which has been renamed to COVID-19. It had been previously had this really big, long scientific name that they have now shortened for clarity and so forth. So COVID-19, COVID-19. It started in Wuhan, China at the end of December, probably was circulating before that, and has proven itself to be deadlier than SARS. SARS, deadlier than SARS was in a year. COVID has surpassed SARS deaths in a month. It has proven itself to be very contagious, and by very contagious, I'm not exactly sure what the level of contagion is, but it is definitely something that spreads easier than SARS or MERS. Has a fatality rate that is much less than SARS or MERS, depending on the day, and the statistics somewhere between 2 and 4% mortality rate right now. And so it's a big concern. Earlier today, the World Health Organization numbers today are 46,997 confirmed cases worldwide, a little over 1,800 cases in the past 24 hours, which are new. In China, 46,550 confirmed cases and 1,800 new. So the vast majority of these cases are still in China. Now, China overnight reported 14,840 new cases in the past 24 hours, including 13,332 cases that were clinically diagnosed, meaning they weren't tested or they don't have positive tests for COVID, but that they, based on symptomology, physical examination, and things like that, clinicians have determined that this is what you have. We see this a lot with influenza, and I don't exactly know what the accuracy rate is for the COVID testing, but for influenza, there's somewhere even up to a 30%, 30 to 50% false negative result rate, meaning someone who has the flu, you do the swab for the flu, and it comes up negative. So in the situation of influenza, if someone has the flu and you know it, very frequently we will just say you have the flu, and treat it as such, rather than running the risk of a false negative result. That could be the case in China. It also has been widely reported that the availability of testing in China has been stressed, meaning that they don't have enough tests to go around, for numbers of people to be tested. So there is that as well. And as you can only imagine, this is a brand new disease, so there's only so many test kits that can be made in a certain period of time. So it's been hugely challenging.
Now, the other thing, though, you've run into some really interesting stories. Folks, I keep telling you, my wife is becoming the journalist of the family. It's kind of scary. But you stumbled onto a really, really interesting story. You somehow got a hold of a young man from China who was an English PhD candidate or just received his PhD. And you have this huge journal, basically, of his. He's given you his information for the entire time of what it's like to be quarantined in Wuhan.
Yeah, so his name is Lu. He actually has been living in the United Kingdom, completed his PhD, and took a teaching position or assistant teaching position at King's College, is from Wuhan, and went home to visit his family over the holidays. So for the Chinese New Year, essentially, was what it was. And has been in quarantine since then in Wuhan. When he was getting on to the airplane, he posted a picture from the airport, and he knew he was going into this virus zone, and essentially said that the Wuhanese are generally a fearless people, and that they have been involved since, for quite some time with overcoming obstacles. In fact, his statement was that they ended the Imperial China in 1911, founded the old and first republic in entire Asia, contributed 100 generals to the new republic. So, it's something that he was not afraid to go into. Now he's there. He's been quarantined. He cannot get home to the United Kingdom. His wife is still in the UK. And so I think that this has been quite an experience.
How did you get in contact with him?
Well, one of my contacts added me to a Facebook group that was discussing the coronavirus when it first came out. And then this individual was in that group as well, and eventually formed his own group, which I joined, and so forth. And I thought, this guy's got a story. This is quite an ordeal that they have gone through. They've been on lockdown for weeks now, not leaving the apartment for most of the time. Lockdown started January 23rd. And, the Americans are being very critical. Many Americans are being very critical of the Chinese response. Like, it's all their fault, this, that, and the other. And the truth of the matter is, it's no one's fault. They didn't choose this to have a new virus. In fact, so much of their population. And they certainly haven't chosen to pass it along outside of the country. The Chinese government has taken unprecedented steps in quarantining 60 million people. And I think that they've done pretty much everything that they could do. So a lot of that criticism is unfounded.
And you know, it's interesting that, and hopefully you'll get this written and put out somewhere. But what's interesting is, you know, how they go about getting food. How, you know, because they're going to start running out of food. What do? Who is it, and who goes out, and how do they get, you know, stuff for the family to live?
So generally speaking, from what I can ascertain, they are allowed to go out and get food. In some locales, one person in the household is allowed to go pick up the food and bring it back. And I'm not sure if that is, you know, the same everywhere, or if this is just that one area. But it is a huge challenge.
All right. And then the last thing that I really want to talk about with you today, you have been unerringly glued to your phone over this guy's story, and he is the guy who is in on the cruise ship.
Yes.
You
Yes.
just love this story.
I do love this story. It's the best thing, I told you today, it's the best thing I've watched since Downton Abbey. So David Abel and his wife are on this cruise ship that is in quarantine in Yokohama, Japan. They had a passenger on their ship that disembarked, and after he disembarked, became sick and was diagnosed with COVID-19. And so the entire ship was quarantined when it returned back to port at Yokohama, Japan. And they are quarantined in their staterooms until February 19th. So David Abel is a passenger on this ship, as well as his wife Sally. And he has started doing live Facebook posts twice a day. From the very beginning, you know, he went live on his Facebook feed and said, you know, from Yokohama, Japan, I'm quarantined, that type of thing. And it has just been so captivating to watch, because you can only imagine, anyone who's ever been on a cruise knows the room is tiny. It's maybe 20 feet long by 12 feet wide, maybe. You know, and that includes a bathroom. You've got enough room for a bed and a couch and not much else.
And nothing else.
He and his wife are fortunate that they have a balcony. But, you know, so again, for anybody that's been on a cruise, it just seems like such a ridiculous situation to be locked inside your room for 14 days. Somebody likened it to prison. I don't know how big a prison cell is, but I would think it's, you know, probably is comparable to that. And he and his wife have just done a marvelous job reporting not only the updates from the ship, but also reporting how the other passengers are doing and so forth. One of the cases that was diagnosed on this ship, and I will say this ship has been rather remarkable in that there are, on board the ship, there have been 280 passengers test positive out of 3,700 people on board. 218 have tested positive. This is the highest number of individuals confirmed diagnosis outside of China, of any other country. So if you want to call the cruise ship a country, you know, if they've become a country, there's more cases on board on that cruise ship than there is in any other country outside of China.
Right.
So one of the individuals that they have at their table, your assigned seating dinner every night, one of the individuals at their table was one of the very first diagnosed with COVID. So the whole time you're watching this thinking, is he going to get sick? You know, are he and his wife going to get sick? They seem perfectly healthy. He has a wicked sense of humor from London, or not London, from the UK. An absolutely wicked sense of humor, and has quite the following. When he goes live, there's, boom, 2,000 people watching. You know, and sometimes there's been as many as 27,000 views and so forth. And, you know, he's just really remarkable. I really, truly think that there needs to be a Castaway 2, you know, movie. Tom Hanks should play David Abel, and I think Helen Mirren should play Sally Abel. The following has been really uplifting, and followers on his feeds have now called him, have given them nicknames, Diamond Dave and Princess Sally. And of course, they're on the Diamond Princess cruise ship. So
You enjoy it.
I enjoy it. So
Sometimes I think that you're part of, well, you're not part of. You consist of maybe 1,000 of the 2,000 hits because you just watch his shows nonstop.
yeah, it's been this whole story with COVID-19 has so many different facets to it. There are so many people that have been impacted. You have 60 million Chinese that were under quarantine. And many of those, and I don't have numbers, but many of those are still under quarantine. You have the whistleblower doctor in China who went onto a chat room in the very first days, before it was even, you know, publicly announced that we had a problem, and warned people that there was a SARS-like outbreak at the hospital in which he was working, and got in trouble by that. The police came and questioned him, and he had to sign a document saying that he promised not to be spreading false rumors anymore and so forth. The virus becomes confirmed. Chinese government is all over it, and unfortunately, this doctor, the whistleblower doctor, who had been questioned so severely by the police, contracts COVID-19, and unfortunately succumbs to it. So you have that angle. You have the angle of the Chinese government has not always been a good actor internationally. And there were problems very early on, you know, with this doctor that makes us think, maybe they're not so great. But truly, they've really stepped up to the plate and been very aggressive with this. And I do not think that there was COVID-19 much prior to, you know, the middle of December, and we probably did not know that this was an actual problem, an identifiable problem, until the last week of December. And so I don't think that there is this huge delay on the Chinese government to sound the alarm internationally and get the World Health Organization involved, because we haven't seen these very strange, aggressive pneumonia clusters outside of China. So there's just so many different legs to this story. And then, of course, the big one that we're all wondering is this the next great pandemic?
I keep saying no. There's not enough people that are being killed by this. This is 2 to 4%.
Well, a pandemic doesn't have anything to do with mortality rates. What a pandemic is well, it depends on whose definition you use. But the World Health Organization definition of pandemic is a new disease that spreads worldwide.
Right.
And this week we had, for the first time, a kind of a cluster that really did start to grow legs. There was an individual from the UK who went to Singapore, didn't know that he had been exposed, then went to France, and exposed 11 other individuals. Well, exposed much more than that, but 11 other individuals became ill with COVID-19. There were 5 from the UK, 5 from France, and 1 individual, you know, somewhere else. And the World Health Organization described that earlier this week as perhaps the spark that starts the fire, that's going to just go. We hope not, but it is a concern. This does appear to be something that has a fairly high level of contagion. It does not appear to be anything like measles, but it certainly looks like it could be akin to the common cold. It is definitely contagious. When you have 4% of the population on a cruise ship test positive.
Right. Last thing, you've talked about David Abel, I guess his name is, the man on the Princess Cruise. Right before or right after you started watching him, there was also another one that came out of Americans who were not nearly as fun to watch or as gracious as David Abel.
There are people on, okay, let's go with this, guys. There are people on this cruise ship that are having real problems being quarantined in a stateroom for 14 days. I personally can't imagine. Can you imagine that happening, period? But then let's say that you're on an inside stateroom, so you don't have a window even. I can't imagine what those people are going through. There have been reports, unsubstantiated reports, where families have traveled together and the kids were sharing a room and the parents were sharing a room. And when they went to quarantine, it was pretty much like, boom, you can't leave your room. So the kids are separated from the parents. If that had happened to us on a cruise, they would have opened the door at the end of the 14 days, and I'm pretty sure our children would have scratched each other's eyeballs out. But by 14 days, your children locked in a stateroom by themselves. I mean, it seems like
with our two daughters. Oh
yeah,
my
it
gosh.
just seems ridiculous. And I have great kids, but I can't imagine. So yeah, there are Americans on the ship that have been less gracious, but I think that there are people of all nationalities that have not been nearly as uplifting as Dave and Sally Abel have been. David Abel is a wedding celebrant by trade and a motivational speaker, and is a very uplifting type of person, I think, by nature, and they both have a very 2 feet on the ground type of mentality. And I think, it's just been an example that I've seen this happen so many times, where people are facing something that is really tough, and the human spirit is amazing and gets them through it. Be it they're facing a really devastating medical diagnosis, or they've lost everything they own in a fire, or they're locked into, their stateroom on a cruise ship for 14 days. The human spirit is just an amazing thing, and people do tend to pick themselves up somehow and move forward, but yeah, I mean, not everybody is going to be just wonderful about this, so.
Okay. Well, that's about it. We're out of time. Anything else you need to say?
I cannot think of anything else that I can say today, except, for everybody to please be thinking about Faye Swetlik and her family. Again, was the 6-year-old found deceased this morning out east. To hold them up in your thoughts and prayers if you pray, or send positive energy, because this is a truly just heartbreaking scenario.
Okay. Next week it's Julie Shields, and we will be back next week.
What is Julie Shields?
Entrepreneur the person who runs the entrepreneurship
Excellent. And
group
she
here.
is the mother
of Athena.
of Athena, who was on our show weeks ago and told us about the people that were gluing themselves to the bridge. Or
And
whatever.
Athena has her own show
Yeah.
starting Monday morning at 7:30 a.m.
Everybody should listen to it. Yeah.
And your show is
Which one? I've got two shows. I have Under Control, which is a good nerd-themed show from 11 to 12 on Wednesday. And from 2 to 3, I have Devil's Advocate with Avenue.
very good.
Yeah.
Very good. So we will be back in a week on the Faculty Lounge on 89.5 WJNU The Quad. Thank you all for listening or watching.
Oh.